Well, hello everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Karen Ann Harlows, also known as the Pink Parliamentarian. And each week I hope to bring you some short tips on parliamentary procedure. I'm going to be presuming the most current edition of Robert's Rules of Order, but I will reference other parliamentary sources, particularly in this episode, but I'm sure in others. You can find out about the services I offer at pinkparliamentarian.com. Also offer free, brief consultations, and my rates are very reasonable. So please go check out the website. You can also contact me there. So without further ado, let's get into episode number 1. This episode is all about seconds. What if a motion isn't seconded? What if debate starts and a motion isn't seconded? What if a decision is made on a motion and afterwards it's figured out, oh my God, there wasn't a second to that motion? What happens then? If the motion passed, is it voided? If it didn't pass, do you have to go through the whole process all over again? This is actually a really common question, but let's step back a second. Let's say member Marcia makes a motion, then member Susan seconds the motion. Debate happens, a decision is made, all is fine, move on with your agenda. But what if something goes wrong? What if member Marcia makes the motion and then debate goes on and the motion passes? And then afterwards, it's realized that the motion is never seconded. Is member Marcia's motion passed? Here's the quick answer. Yes. I know there are some people out there who are like, nope, it wasn't second. It's fatally flawed. Well, that's not a fatal flaw, and let's discuss why. Knowing the why about any parliamentary situation is very useful because there will be times when you're going to come into contact with situations that you're not familiar with. And knowing the why of other ones will help you come to a correct conclusion nearly all of the time in situations you're not as familiar with. Because despite whatever fear people may have, and I'll show you why. Because let me show you why. Oof. This is a bag of resources I brought for this particular episode. Now, obviously, you're not going to need to reference all of this. But even with just the original, current edition of Roberts, it can feel intimidating. Let's take a look at it. Let's just get the full weight of intimidation upon us, shall we? Okay, it's towards the top. I need a new one. You can tell this is a much used book. The covers have been stapled many times. The fact is, you don't need to memorize all of this, but we're going to go through some common things. But there is a logic to this. Do not let it intimidate you. Other resources I brought just for discussion that you're not going to need is just some past editions of Roberts. So this one is the 12th, this one is the 11th, this one is the 10th, and this one is the 9th. I'm looking at getting some of the older ones, but it's not really necessary. And I also brought, this isn't the most current edition either, but it's the American Institute of Parliamentarians Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedure, which we'll refer to, and also Parliamentary Law, just a riveting page turner by General Roberts. But most of the time, this is what you're going to have. We're going to go over Robert's Rules in brief, which I can't recommend enough in a future show. So why is Marcia's motion still valid? Well, let's go to the source. And for that, I need my glasses and my notes because we are running a professional operation here. So the notes say, a second merely implies that the seconder agrees that the motion should come before the meeting and not that he necessarily favors the motion. That's really important to know. Just because you second a motion doesn't mean you're going to vote for it or that you agree with it, but that you agree it is important enough for the meeting time to be spent on. It goes on to say a member may second a motion and may even use the word "I support," which is used in an earlier example instead of second, because he would like to see the assembly go on record as rejecting the proposal if he believes that would be the result. You can take a look at that. Reference would be 411. The 9th through the 11th editions all say the same thing. And as I said, that's the limit of how far back I went. And also the current edition of the AIPSC, also, not the current edition, I think this is a 2012 edition, but I'm pretty sure the current edition says the same thing. Oddly enough, I also took a look at Demeter's, but I think it's called Demeter's, and it's a Demeter's Manual of Parliamentary Law and Procedure. I have the 1969 revised edition, says a second indicates approval, but this is the only source that said otherwise. However, things did get a little weird when I went into General Roberts' parliamentary law, because in definitions, it states that a seconder is someone who seconds, okay, that makes sense, or endorses a motion. And I have a feeling we're using endorsement today in a slightly different way than was done in the 1920s. I am going to assume, because it's the only way that would make sense to me, is that the word endorse there is not used in the strict sense of approving the motion, but of approving the idea that the motion should come before the assembly. That would make sense. You know, words do change, meanings change, we use them differently. That's the subject of one of my other shows, not the word endorse, but words in history that I would ask you to go check out. It's called Jurassic Dictionary, and I also have a political show. If you like minority politics, I come from a very, very strong libertarian point of view. You can check out Pink Flame of Liberty. But before we end our time today, I'd like to give you a few tidbits. So let me look at what I have written down here. Motions that come out of a committee, unless it's a committee that only comprises one person, which is possible, but motions that come out of a committee do not require a second, because it's presumed if a majority of the committee approved the report, which included the motion, that indicates the requisite support, that it is worth the assembly's time for that motion to be heard. And also, while we're on committees, within a committee, motions say you have a committee of 5 people, motions made within that committee before it reports out also do not require a second, because they go by small board rules. And in small boards, which is defined in Roberts as 11 or so or less, also do not require a second. That will be the subject of a future episode. And also, this should be obvious, a member can never second their own motion. But if you're having one of those fun kind of meeting and you have a very pleasant chair, you might try it as a joke to second your own motion just to see what happens. But that is not proper. I'm only saying that, in fun and jest. That's not what you're supposed to do. Now, interestingly, canons, and that's yet another book, Cannon's Concise Guide to Rules of Order 1992, suggests that in order to save time, that the seconder be lined up, because there's that awkward pause that sometimes happens. So remember, Marcia makes a motion, and then there's silence. And there are people who wish to second, but they don't want to interrupt someone else who wants to second. And then the silence draws out and people are starting to wonder, wait, is there really support to hear this motion? And things can get awkward. So what Canons suggests is that member Marcia lines up her seconder ahead of time, and at the end of her motion say, and member Susan seconds this motion, with member Susan ready to rise up and affirm that in fact she does. I thought that was a really interesting hint. So I hope that puts any misunderstanding that after debate or passage or failure that the lack of a second is somehow fatal. I hope it puts that to rest, and I hope you heartily second that. Tune in next week for another short tip. And again, remember, you can visit me at pinkparliamentarian.com. And remember, as I always like to say, rules are there to protect rights, and not wound people. The rules serve us. We do not serve the rules. So until next time, I hope you have an awesome week.